Let me show you how I organize my sewing space. Today, I'll walk you through how I've created a productive sewing space based on 3 areas: my cutting, drafting, and sewing workflow, tool storage, and fabric storage. In my opinion, the secret to having an organized sewing space is not about having more, but having less. I've created a streamlined, organized workspace with just the essentials. I regularly ask myself, do I use this often? If not, I either get rid of it or store it somewhere else. While I have an entire room for my sewing space, half of it is used for my painting space. The other half is used for sewing. So it is rather tight, particularly given I have a very, very large cutting table. So the rest of the space is rather small. I also do not like clutter, so I like to have clear surfaces. Therefore, everything that I have needs a home. The less cluttered my room, the more mental clarity I have. So it's very important to me to have clear spaces and a home for everything. Now that I have a minimized space, let me show you how I optimize and organize all the tools and supplies that I do have. So let's talk about the cutting and drafting table. It was very important to me that I have a very, very large table so I can lay out all my fabric and all my patterns at one time. It really does squeeze into this room though. I've used every inch possible. So I have to be very smart with the rest of the storage. To the left of my work table, I have a cart that has all of my pattern making tools and supplies that are in easy reach. They're very organized. I use some bins and the different cart levels to keep things very easy to reach. Underneath the table, I keep all my fabric and some other supplies, that maybe some extra tape, and I keep all of my interfacing and my lining. So everything is with very easy reach of anything that I'll need to sew with. And I do use this vertical space. Here I hang regularly used slopers and maybe the pattern that I'm currently working on, so it's easily available. The rest of my patterns I put into the closet and they're all organized neatly. I keep my cutting table exclusively for cutting and drafting. I keep it clear of tools. I may have just a few of my regular tools that here on the side, which will include perhaps my French curve, a pencil, my tape, but I do not let it get piled up with fabric or with papers because then it gets very difficult to work. So I keep it clutter free at all times. And once a pattern is completed, I keep it in the closet. I number each pattern. I just add a number to the next pattern that I create and I store them in number order. I also have a sketchbook, which I sketch each design, and on the sketch, I add the number of the pattern. So it's very easy for me if I want to recreate that. Also on the pattern, I write any notes down, something that maybe I really liked about the pattern, or maybe something I didn't like, or any adjustments that I made to the pattern. Because you think you're gonna remember, but you rarely do. So I really like to take notes right after I create a pattern and after I sew it, so I remember, what I was thinking at the time. And in my sketchbook, not only do I add the pattern number, I also write which fabric I used, where I bought the fabric, and what the name of the fabric is. That makes it very easy so I can remember in the future which fabric I made that from. And to keep track of my fabrics, I use a fabric swatch book. So as soon as I get my fabric home, I make sure I wash the fabric because pre-washing is very important. So you can allow for any shrinkage that will happen before you actually make the garment. I only then store my fabric away once it's pre-washed. Nothing ever goes into my fabric and stash until it is washed. I will cut a little square out of each fabric and I put it into my swatch book, and you can see here I have all the pertinent information about the washing instructions, where I bought the fabric, what type of fabric, what's the name of the fabric, the fabric content. All this information is very, very useful. So if I really like it in the future, I know where to go to buy some more. And then right behind me when I'm standing at my cutting table is my sewing table. So I put my sewing machine right next to my serger. I have a rolling chair that I can roll from one to the other, so it makes very easy to go back and forth with that. I always keep this table very clear of clutter. You'll see here I have this little bin that I keep all of the tools that I use regularly, which include things like my seam ripper, a hand needle, maybe some extra like white thread, because I use that regularly. If I've taken it out of the machine, I might just pop it back into there because I know I'm going to use it again quickly. A little pair of snips, these kinds of things I keep there so it's nice and orderly, but it's easily reachable. I also keep my one pair of my fabric shears on this table. I have a second pair of fabric shears that I keep on my cutting room table, so I don't have to keep moving them back and forth. So it's I love my cutting table. The one thing that some people have that I don't is a little pressing area right next to their cutting table. That would be very useful, but given my limited space, I do not have room, or I choose not to squeeze it in. I have enough squeezed in here. And my laundry room is right next door, and I have my ironing board set up there, so it's quite easy for me to just take a couple steps out of this room into the laundry room, and I can, press anything that I need right there. So it's actually quite easy for me to do. But some people have a little tiny iron that they might put with a little ironing mat. I probably could squeeze one on the table, but it's not important enough to me. So I'm happy to walk into the other room. Now, let me talk about how I organize my tools. I had mentioned before, right next to my cutting table, I have a rolling rack. In that, I include all of my pattern making tools. So I have things like my French curves and my pattern weights, my notcher. You can see all the things right here, and it keeps everything very orderly and an easy reach. And on my sewing table, I keep all the sewing tools that I need there, so they're an easy reach, but they're in a nice bucket, so it keeps the clutter at bay, and I put everything back when I'm done. And less frequently used items I keep in the closet. So I have ribbons in there and some maybe extra paper that I need to do my sketching. I also have a very large bin of specialty fabrics that I really don't have a project for. It's more like cottons and things. I keep that in a bin in another room. My kids sometimes raid that bin if they want to make a project. So it's just too big to have in my sewing room, but I love having it because I do pull from there sometimes, and I have no problem going to another room just to pull from that. And at my drafting table, I could use the vertical space to hang some of my tools as well. I don't prefer to have a pegboard because, again, I don't like clutter, so that is not a good option for me. But I know a lot of people love having a pegboard. They love being able to see all their tools just hung up on their wall, and for small spaces, it really does help optimize the space. So it's something to consider. The only thing I hang up are my slopers. I don't mind having them hung up, and it's really quite important for me to have them there, and otherwise I'd have to keep going in and out of my closet, and I prefer not to do that. Now let's tackle fabric storage. I do not like having a large stash. I guess you could figure this out by now. I like to be minimal. I don't like having excess around. So this is basically the most fabric I have at any one time. I buy things and then I make sure that I use it before I'm tempted to buy anything else. So I have it there right below my sewing table. It is facing the window though, so it maybe not be the best place to have your fabric facing a window. Perhaps it could fade the colors, but since I go through my fabric rather quickly because I have such a small stash, I'm not too worried about that. I could put it in the closed bins right below it, But again, it hasn't been a problem for me. So I like to see what I have, and I have so little stash. I know some people love to keep huge amounts of stash, but I just find that a little inefficient, and then it's like almost impossible to ever get through all the fabric that you bought. So I definitely like to use what I buy. When I get the fabric home, I immediately wash it. I pre-wash it, so to allow any shrinkage before I ever put it in on these shelves, because I know everything that's on these shelves is pre-washed, which is really important. And you can see I have these little labels that I include where I bought the fabric, what type of fabric, how much yardage of fabric, just so it makes it really easy, because it may be a few months before I actually get to sewing and I might have forgotten where I bought something. I also have the fabric swatch in my fabric book, so that is a little bit of a backup if I did forget. Some of my fabric is very similar. Sometimes I'll buy 2 navy pontes from 2 different companies. They look so similar, it would be very, very hard to tell necessarily which one came from where. So I'm really trying right now to explore different fabric stores and different fabric types. This is the one challenge that I'm tackling right now, because I do find getting the perfect fabric for a project to be very difficult, particularly since most of my fabric buying is online, which I think for a lot of us that is. I am lucky that I live very close to the New York City garment district, so sometimes I go in and I can touch the fabric and feel it. The one downside I find with the garment district is not all the stores has very well labeled fabric, so you don't know what the fabric content is, so that makes it a little bit more challenging for me, because then if I really like it, probably gonna have trouble getting it again. This one little store I go into, nothing's labeled, the prices are different every single time I go in there, and so I really can't get this fabric again. So I have to grab it, enjoy it, but I'm not gonna be able to make anything else with it ever again, unless I buy a lot of yardage, which I'm always skeptical to do. And I keep like fabrics together. So here on the right, I have all my brushed poly, which I use for casual dresses or skirts. And next to that, I have some ponte, which I really love to use for my work dresses. And then I have some sort of maybe a mixture of more specialty fabrics. I have this faux suede here, which is quite beautiful. So I'll just sort of have a combination here as well. If you want to see the entire sewing room tour, check out this video here. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I would appreciate it very much.